All right. Welcome to session, 6? Making sense of the Siddur. I'm Rabbi Phil, and this evening we're talking about Shabbat primarily. I thought also to include talking about the service for the reading of the Torah. I think I may have mentioned that last time. I decided we had plenty to talk about with just Shabbat today, so we're going to keep that can down the road till next week. So next week, our final session will be covering reading of the Torah and also holidays and specifically Hallel as well, which actually we're going to lay some of the groundwork for that actually today as well. So I think that actually makes just as much sense as trying to cram it all in today. But we're definitely going to be drawing on some of what we've learned already particularly about the Ma'ariv and Shacharit, the evening and morning services, the weekday ones. I think also for reasons of length, and also because it's not that interesting, and also because we generally don't daven Shabbat Mincha here. I'm not going to talk in any sort of specifics about Shabbat Mincha. There is some difference between weekday Mincha and Shabbat Mincha, but since we don't actually daven either one of those around here, I decided to focus my efforts a little bit. And we'll get right into it actually with Friday night, Erev Shabbat Ma'ariv. So if you recall your diagrams, I don't know if anyone brought your charts from last week. That's okay. If you're following along at home, you can. Hi, Stephanie, by the way, I see your chat. Thanks for signing on to be with us. This is a little, there we go, that's better. Yeah, okay. The charts in which we compared regular weekday Shacharit to weekday Mincha and Ma'ariv, some of that is going to come in handy. I basically made an abbreviated chart here based on what we learned last time. These are the four main elements of a regular evening Ma'ariv service. Start with you may recall, a Pesukei de Zimra, which is highly abbreviated. It's only 2 verses, actually. In line with it being, a general and abbreviated service because it's night. We're a little bit hurried to get home. Shema and its blessings fit there because that's the opposite. That's the other part of saying that reciting Shema when you lie down and when you rise up. This is the when you lie down part. Amidah, as we talked about, which without a full repetition because there was no evening sacrifice for that to correspond to, and then concluding prayers because you always got to have concluding prayers. There's no service that doesn't end with Elenu and Kaddish. So I sketched out the diagram a little bit here, and we're going to fill it in as we go for Shabbat Ma'ariv. So this is specifically Friday night. Saturday night is different, so this is specifically Friday night only. And I'm going to do the sort of less exciting parts first. With regard to Shema and its blessings, no changes. That one is straightforward. It's basically running back exactly what we would normally do during the week. With the Amidah, there is a change. There is a pretty significant change here. Instead of 18 blessings, which are really 19, we do 7 blessings. So actually, I'm going to write in blue for variety. I'm going to note that it's the 7 blessing version of the Amidah, but I'm not going to talk about that now. I'm going to save the talk about that when we talk about Shacharit. There's also, and this is interesting because it's not in the Siddur that we normally use here, which is a reconstruction of Siddur, but it is present in the ones that are in front of you. If you're curious, this is totally academic because we don't do it here. On page 47, there's sort of a pseudo repetition of the Amidah. This is actually the kind of thing you might pass right by without noticing ever. If you check out page 47, and for folks following along at home, we're using the Sim Shalom Shabbat edition, what they call the Slim Shalom, because it's just Shabbat and festivals. Don't worry too much; you're not going to miss anything really, really crucial here. But this comes at the end of the Amidah. There's kind of a pseudo repetition there. It starts Magen Avot Bidvaro. It's this, normally there would not be an out loud repetition by the leader during the Amidah, but there is this little bit out loud on Shabbat evening Mariv. It happens to be 7 phrases, which correspond to those 7 paragraphs of the Amidah, which we'll talk a little bit about later. That's not that exciting. Like I said, we don't do it, but it is a little bit of a note. There is a little bit of a mini repetition on Friday nights in that way. And the only other addition here you'll find is, of course, Kiddush, which should immediately follow there. That kind of fits in towards the tail end of the service. A lot of different theories about why Kiddush, which is specifically a home ritual, would make its way into the synagogue service. Probably has to do with historically synagogues also sort of functioned like hostels a little bit. They were meeting houses. People would maybe be staying overnight. Sometimes folks would come to services, but not actually be able to afford wine for themselves at home, and so they would make Kiddush at the synagogue, and that would exempt them from their mitzvah. So Kiddush made its way into the synagogue service as well, but frequently congregations will pull that back out of the service like we do here and do it at the end of things in the social hall. But you'll find it in your prayer books as well. In terms of from here on over, those are really the only differences for Shabbat evening Mari versus the weekday. Where it gets really interesting is here, because you may recall Psuke de Zimra in a weekday Mari service was just those 2 blessings. It's like the shortest possible intro. Do you know the name of what we get right here on Friday nights? It's frequently substituted for the name of the whole service, which we call Kabbalat Shabbat. Very good.
That's what I was going to ask is how does this
good, okay.
To Kabbalat Shabbat?
Good. Okay. So in place of what we call Psuke de Zimra, and remember that this is literally verses of song, and it's almost primarily psalms, we do get in this place what's called Kabbalat Shabbat. Okay. And this Kabbalat Shabbat, you could almost do a whole session on, you could do a whole class on Kabbalat Shabbat almost by itself. It's really interesting in comparison to a lot of these other units of liturgy. Kabbalat Shabbat really can stand alone. The Shema and its blessings make each one of those pieces of liturgy really only make sense in service of something else, like in service of blessing around Shema, right? The Amidah really, the pieces only make sense, serving the whole. But Kabbalat Shabbat is really could be a whole service unto itself. It was, of course, it fits in where Psuke de Zimra would go. So it was originally intended as an introduction to an orchestrated whole, which is the Ma'ariv service, but it eventually really surpassed that secondary role and took on a life of its own. Generally speaking, we don't even call our Friday night services Shabbat evening Ma'ariv. We call them Kabbalat Shabbat because that's what people are there for. Frequently, the length that it takes to get the amount of time it takes to get through Kabbalat Shabbat is as much or more than the entire rest of the service. It's really been expanded on. It really overshadows Ma'ariv in a lot of ways. Okay. I'm going to try to use the rest of the board here to outline Kabbalat Shabbat. As you might expect, it's loaded full of psalms. I'm going to sketch them out, and then we'll kind of go back over them and trace the development of the whole rubric through time. So there are 5. We'll call them sub-rubrics, to keep using our language within Kabbalat Shabbat. First, there's a series of 6 psalms, which are Psalms 95 and 99 in a row. So it's 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, and then also 29. If you'd like to follow along in your Sim Shaloms, you can open up to page 15. And if you're following along at home and you're looking at the Safari website, you could just scroll ahead a little bit. There are these days, if you open up to Kabbalat Shabbat, the Kabbalat Shabbat service starts in in our books on page 13, there are a number of hymns that are pretty familiar to us. We're talking about the core of the liturgy that predates this. So like Shalom Aleichem, Shabbat HaMalkah, Yidid Nefesh. These are other piyutim, other liturgical poems that have been added on the front end. Not technically part of Kabbalat Shabbat proper, but well loved. So once you skip past Yidid Nefesh, you'll hit the first of our psalms, Psalm number 95, starts with Chunarana. So we have 6 psalms, 95, 96, 97, 89, plus 29. That's rubric number 1. Piece number 2, you get a poem, which is, of course, a piyut poem. Ana B'Koach is what it's called. And that, I didn't mark my page down, but you could find that just before Lachadodi. It's on page 20, very good. You'll get Lachadodi next, perhaps the most well-known, another poem. Lachadodi. Perhaps, the most well-known of all Jewish liturgical poems. It's certainly kind of the centerpiece of Kabbalat Shabbat. Unit number 4, you get 2 more psalms, which are number 92 and 93. I'm going to switch colors briefly here because you get a Mortis Kaddish. Which, as we've talked about frequently, Kaddishes serve as punctuation marks. I would say, think of this one as a semicolon, because there's a little bit more to come as well.
Is this where we usually do Mortis Kaddish and Kabbalat Shabbat? I haven't been to Kabbalat Shabbat since you've been doing it.
So frequently we don't.
Okay.
I'm teaching you what's in the conservative liturgy. This is not the Siddur we actually use here on Friday nights. Frequently we don't do it here. It does, of course, come up at the end of the service, and that's frequently where we do it. I think certainly for me, and I think a lot of folks would agree, it feels strange to do it more than once, and to sort of make put the mortars on the spot more than once. So frequently, no, we don't actually necessarily do a mortars Kaddish here. And I think the other reason is we don't do the section that comes after it, which is number 5. There's actually we'll call it a study selection. Which is some passages from the Mishnah Shabbat, chapter 2. It's some rabbinic texts about lighting candles, kindling Shabbat lights. So just if you're following along in your book, right after Mortis Kaddish, it's on 24, beginning on 25. It says sources for study and reflection. You get some passages from Shabbat, Parak 2, Parak 12, Parak 18, a little bit from Talmud, a little bit from Midrash. Some of those rabbinic texts, and it's followed up by you always gotta end with the Kaddish, and the Kaddish specifically for after you study rabbinic text like Mishnah and Gemara is Kaddish D'Rabbanan. Okay, and that. If this one's a semicolon, this one's a period. This is the end of the sentence. Okay.
So you're saying we don't usually do what you have the Mortis Kaddish or the.
Yeah, in terms of what would happen here, generally speaking, on a Friday night, we would do some selection. We would almost certainly not do all 6 of these. Yeah. It's really not in their entirety. We generally don't do Ana B'Koach there. I'm teaching you again the kind of normative Ashkenazi tradition, but also kind of the conservative and north of that in terms of traditionalism. I'm not even sure Ana B'Koach shows up in the Reconstruction Siddur. I don't think it does. So we don't do that.
I'm pretty sure I've heard it, so I would imagine it's.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard it. I don't
do it other places.
Yeah, sure. Other communities definitely do. I mean, it's in the conservative. It's in the Siddur Shalom. Friday nights here, we don't use this Siddur, we use the
Right.
Kol Shema, and I don't think it even appears in Kol Shema. But I'd have to double check that. The Chadodi we definitely do. Frequently do at least one of these two psalms. We skip Mourner's Kaddish and the Mishnah, and we instead of doing Kiddush Rabbanan, more than likely what we would do is a Chatzi Kaddish. I think that's pretty standard. Like I know for sure that Kol Shema, the reconstruction of Siddur, doesn't have the study selection. And if you're not doing that and you don't want to make the mourners do a Kaddish, Chatzi Kaddish fits better in there. Frequently, that's what we do instead. This would be the traditional layout. Make sense?
Yeah, Richard did a class on Kabbalat Shabbat
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
And it had really interesting history about how the service came to be that.
Well, that's what I'm planning to talk about next. Yeah. I wouldn't leave you hanging with that. Like I said, it could be a whole class unto itself. It clearly deserves it because, yes, the construction of all this is very interesting. But in terms of the structure, this makes sense. No questions so far? Okay. And if folks following along on the computer have questions, you can type them in and I will try to get them answered as well. Okay. So note that in terms of how can we analyze this and sort of pick apart the layers? I suggested to treat Mourner's Kaddish as a semicolon and Kiddush Rabbanan as a period, right? However, think about how Mourner's Kaddish functions elsewhere. It usually comes up at the end of concluding prayers, and it's the last thing we do, right? Like frequently, Mourner's Kaddish has the sort of causal strength of a period. So there's something sort of weird about Mourner's Kaddish being here that should make you think, basically, well, maybe that used to be an ending. And whatever comes after it, was added to it. And it turns out that's more than likely exactly what the case was. These two Psalms 92 and 93, were the original. In a previous era, before all this sort of accretion of material together, Kabbalat Shabbat that led into Shabbat Evening Ma'ariv would have been just these two Psalms, just piece number 4 here. And that dates back to about the 5th century in Palestine. So it's now Israel, and it would have been these two Psalms, 92 and 93, and ended with a Mourner's Kaddish that would have acted like had the strength of a period before going into Shema and the rest of the service. Why 92 and 93? Well, 92, if you check in your books, and it's on page 23. What does the very first line of Psalm 92 say? Page 23, who's got it? Very first line?
Song for Shabbat.
A song for Shabbat. So how could you not say this one, right? 92 is the song for Shabbat. You may recall, we mentioned previously, we sort of passed over it, but if you've come to Sim Shalom services before, you'll know that there's a psalm for each day of the week. The thinking is that these were psalms recited by the Levites of the temple as part of the daily service. And so this is the one that was recited on Shabbat. Simple as that. Why 93? If you flip the page, you see 93 right there, it's much shorter. You'll note it doesn't mention Shabbat specifically. Psalm 93 is actually the psalm of the day for Friday. So they're a little bit backwards. You would expect it to be 93 and 92. If we were just reading the Psalm of the Day straight through, it would be 93 and 92. But here we have them in the order they're ordered in the book of Psalms. And what seems to have happened, and without going too far down this road, because again, this could be a whole class, these two came to be associated together as kind of a unit. Seems like what used to happen is there was another Psalm, I think it's 143 or something like that used to introduce these two. And eventually it dropped away, and we were left with 92 and 93. We're not going too far down that road, but you will see 92 and 93 paired here. They also come up again as a unit in this order in Sukkot Zimra of Shabbat morning as well. You'll see them paired there together as well. So basically, these two started being thought of as a unit. There used to be something else here that dropped away, and we were left with these two Psalms in Modern Scottish. So as of the 5th century CE, of course, in the land of Israel, that's what Kabbalat Shabbat would have looked like on a Friday night in a synagogue. So about the same era, the Mishnah has already been composed, the Talmud is in the process of formation. That's what Kabbalat Shabbat would have looked like. None of this, the rest of the stuff would have existed yet. Okay. Fast forward a handful of centuries to roughly the 8th to 9th centuries, now in Babylonia. Important piece of background. One day we'll do an intro to rabbinic texts and things like that. There were basically two centers of learning and two centers of the Jewish world in the rabbinic era. One was in the land of Israel, and the other was in what they called Babylon, modern day Iraq, Mesopotamia, that area. And early on, the center in Palestine was the more dominant one. Over time, the center in Babylon gradually took on more and more importance. There were two major academies there that exerted a lot of influence. You may know that there are actually two versions of the Talmud, one from Babylonia and one from Palestine. The Babylonian was much longer and has become much more normative. Basically, that Palestinian tradition or the Babylonian tradition ended up winning out, and consequently, they were the ones to add next to Kabbalat Shabbat. So this Mishnah study section was added in about somewhere in the 8th to 9th century in Babylon. Of course, now we've got Psalms, Mortar's Kaddish study. You can't just end here, you got to make a break before Ma'ariv, so they added an appropriate Kaddish as well. Since we just did some rabbinic text, they added Kaddish to Ramadan. In terms of why this was added, it's not totally clear, but the best guess, scholarly consensus-wise, is that it was basically a political move against a group called the Karaites, who you may have heard of. The Karaites rejected rabbinic Judaism. They held by scripture alone. And so they would have had a very literal reading of the verse, Exodus 35, verse 3, that says, "You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations on the Sabbath day." They would have taken that very literally to mean there is no mitzvah of lighting Shabbat candles. It's not only that you should not light fires on Shabbat, but you should not even leave anything burning into Shabbat. The rabbis interpreted that differently. They held that, yes, we know we're not supposed to light a fire, but we also know that we're supposed to enjoy Shabbat. How are we supposed to enjoy Shabbat in the dark? We're not supposed to suffer. So their ruling was we should light candles that then should be kept burning through Shabbat. So this is basically an anti-Karaite position. By making this part of the liturgy where you learn about the mitzvah of lighting Shabbat candles on Shabbat, they basically were deliberately excluding the Karaites from the service. Prayer is sometimes political. And the history of the Siddur is sometimes interestingly political.
So is that where we light the candles?
No, we would actually do it
Earlier, right.
before the start of the service.
Right.
Yeah. And like I said, this section doesn't even appear in Kol Nishma. It's study. It's not prayer text. It's rabbinic legal text. So in that sense, it doesn't really fit with the vibe of Kabbalat Shabbat. But nonetheless, I made it into the standard liturgy, I think, for that reason. Good. Okay. So as of the 8th, 9th century Babylon, we have Psalm 92, 93, a Mortar's Kaddish, some selections from the Mishnah, and a Kaddish Rabbanan. Whoever edited all this together left those Kaddishes in place. Okay, now it gets really interesting. So, sections 1, 2, and 3 were introduced significantly later in the 16th century, roughly, by Kabbalists. Primarily in a town called Tzfat, often spelled as Safed in English, but pronounced Tzfat. in Hebrew. So again, this could be a whole class on its own, but to briefly summarize what Kabbalah and the Kabbalists were all about, the Kabbalists of this era in Tzfat were disciples of Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was a Kabbalist originally from Spain. We mentioned him, I think, briefly last week as well. Centered around a text called the Zohar, which is a mystical text, purports to be the work of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, although it's almost certainly not his work. It came much later than that. It's a mystical text. Deals with mystical ideas about the creation of the universe, the 10 Sephirot, which are divine emanations through which the world came into being. It's very cool and very weird and very much not where we're going today. But the Kabbalists in Tzfat introduced these sections, the 6 Psalms and these 2 poems. You can also, their influence is pretty profound. They got their name into the headline here, right? Kabbalah means to receive, to welcome. So Kabbalat Shabbat, made it into, the welcoming of Shabbat. And the pretext for adding these psalms actually comes from the Talmud. Even though they were mystics, they read the Talmud, but they read it in a bit of a different way. So there's a source sheet in front of you. Only one source today, and if you're following online, just go ahead and click that Safari link to the source sheet. It's just about 2 sentences from Tractate Shabbat, page 119a. And can I get a volunteer to read that out loud? Whoever's got it. Go for it.
Rabbi Hanina would wrap himself in his garment and stand at nightfall on Shabbat Eve and say, "Come, and we will go out to greet Shabbat the Queen." Rabbi Yanai would put on his garment on Shabbat Eve and said, "Enter, O bride, enter, O bride." Good.
So it's in context. It's this kind of little throwaway line. They're talking about Oneg Shabbat, like rejoicing on Shabbat. And we have these 2 little mini stories about the habits of these 2 rabbis. These lines got essentially no notice all the way up until the 16th century. There was nothing, of practical significance derived from them until the Kabbalists came along, read them, and really read them very differently. Basically, this is about the same time as Lecha Dodi was composed. We'll talk about Lecha Dodi in a minute. But it turned from the kind of, quirky, perhaps, individualized practice of these single rabbis into a ritualized means for the whole community to greet Shabbats. Note the words that Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Yanai use. For one thing, they go out. They literally go out to meet Shabbat, who is personified here as 2 different things. 1, a queen, a malkah, and 2, a bride, a kala. Right, and they're treated in the same way. They've put on their nice garments. They've gone out to greet them and do so proactively. Right, one is sort of calling to the other, "Come, let's go out and greet Shabbat the Queen." And the other one goes and says, now addressing Shabbat directly, "Enter, O bride, enter, boi kala, right? Enter, O bride, enter, O bride." Okay. We'll come back to Lecha Dodi a little bit, because hopefully some of those lines, like boi kala, resonate from hearing that before. But I want to talk about the Psalms first, because they're going to make Lecha Dodi make a little bit more sense. Okay. So the ones that are included here start at 95 and go up through 99. Psalms numbered 93, so number 93 and 94 right before this. 93 all the way through 99 form a unit. So, again, this could be its own class, and this is a little bit of a diversion, but the book of Psalms actually has subdivisions and sort of subunits in it. It's just numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 150. But careful literary analysis reveals that Psalms are grouped by certain themes. It's also divided into 5. There are 5 what they call doxologies. It's sort of a break in the theme, and it's usually the end of a psalm. Sort of has a repeated theme. It's a praise theme, all the way until the end. The end of Psalm 150. Kol haneshama tehallel, kol haneshama tehallel. Like let every soul praise God. Something along that theme appears 5 different times through the book of Psalms, and basically chops the book of Psalms into 5. What other book is divided into 5? The Torah. Good. So it's not a coincidence. So there's this 5-part division of the book of Psalms. There are also subunits. We spoke previously about the daily Hallel that becomes the core of Sukkot Zimra on weekdays. It's those last 6 Psalms. Psalm 145, which we call Ashrei, 46, 147, 148, 149, 150 forms a unit that's all about praise, 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 praise. It's like hallelujah over and over and over again. That's a unit. When we talk about Hallel next week, we'll talk about that again. But 93 to 99 are what they call enthronement or kingship psalms. Basically because they all depict God as a king. They often contain the phrase Adonai Malach, God is or has become the king. And so they're thought of as being kind of their subunits within the book of Psalms. So it makes sense that they would be read in order. We don't read all of them though. 93 already is down here for one thing. 94 unfortunately gets left out. I don't really have a good reason for why. But we pick up at 95, and if you count, you get 6 Psalms. Oh, I should point out Psalm 29 also, even though it's not part of that, even though it's elsewhere in the book, shares that same kingship motif. If you look at Psalm 29, you get lines like, let's see. Yes. Should be, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at 92. No wonder that was looking so strange to me. I was looking at 92 instead of 29. Psalm 29. Here you go. Psalm of David. Acclaim Adonai. Towards the end there. Vayeshev Adonai melech le'olam. God will be enthroned as a king forever. Psalm 29 is also a kingship psalm, even though it's not part of that same series. Okay. There actually is one other kingship psalm in the book of Psalms, number 47. We read that on Rosh Hashanah when we blow the shofar, actually. So again, could be its whole class. There are going to be a lot of diversions here. Okay. So what we end up with are 6 kingship psalms, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 29, all kingship psalms, leading into 92, the psalm of the day for Shabbat, and with an additional 8th psalm, 93, partially because these are unit, and partially because this one, again, is also a kingship psalm. That kind of makes sense? Okay. And in the flow of things, if this one, the Shabbat psalm, is in the 7th position, what does that framework remind you of?
Week.
The week, more specifically.
Well, Shabbat.
Which is a reminder of? Good, creation. Yeah. I know you would have got there. Good, exactly. So 6 kingship psalms representing the days of creation, leading up to the 7th one here, 92 for Shabbat, plus 8. We'll talk about why I think there's an 8th in a second. But this is the embellished part here right before day 7, where we get these 2 beautiful liturgical poems. So there's a deliberate mimicry and a deliberate evocation of the 6 days of creation and the 7th as a day of rest through using specifically these kingship psalms. So why the kingship psalms? Yeah, that's that what you want to know? Yeah. So right, why use that? It's not as haphazard as it might appear. So remember, these rabbis, Yana and Chanina, personified Shabbat, right? They conceptualized this time as a person, as a bride, as a queen, right? The liturgy of Kabbalat Shabbat basically reframes these kingship psalms, so they're actually not read here as if they're about God being enthroned. They're about Shabbat, the queen. And the sort of conceit here is that these are addressed directly to Shabbat herself. So read that way, what we're saying when we recite these psalms is we're talking to Shabbat and saying, Shabbat, rule be enthroned, but we're not enthroning a king, we're enthroning a queen, and that queen is our queen of Shabbat, which is really, I mean, it's a brilliant rereading both of the psalms themselves and also of kind of the whole approach, reframing them from being about God to being about Shabbat. And what you might have thought was like, okay, 7 and 7, we'd use 7 kingship psalms. We'd use 93, 94, right up through 99, corresponding 7 days duration. We could have used all of them, all those ones in a row, but instead the sequence begins at 95. Why? You can check out 95 if you want, but it makes a really natural introduction. The first line is, L'chuder Adonai al Adonai, let us sing to Adonai. Because remember, this is functioning as Psuke Zimra. It's still warming us up for prayer. This one has the best introduction. If we had started with 93, we would end up with something like Adonai Malach Geut Lavesh, Adonai is sovereign, crowned with splendor. That's nice, but it doesn't sort of fit with the theme, the purpose quite so well. So
It doesn't speak to creating a relationship either. So this
93 doesn't?
95. Well, I don't know.
Oh, 95.
But 95. Let us sing to Adonai.
Mhm.
And it's like the phrases in the.
Yeah.
It's like enter into this relationship.
Excellent. Yeah, exactly. This one is clearly the best intro, right? This one is sets up everything so much better than 93 could. So that's one reason. That leaves us in the position of using number 29 for day 6, which is, there's a great drush on, or a little bit on that in here, which is that Psalm 29 portrays the power of God as revealed in a thunderous storm. 7 times the voice of Adonai is mentioned, Kol Adonai. Some interpret this as an allusion to the 7 days of creation culminating in Shabbat. So this one also really nails the theme too. So we got, and it culminates, like we said, in 92, which is already Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, plus 93, which makes it 8 psalm. Now, I can't tell you for sure that this is what they were thinking when they added it up this way, but here's my drash on why we get 8. Basically, 7 is what they call in Bible studies a typological number. So just like it's sort of a number that's a little too specific to be exactly right, but it conveys something. It conveys a meaning. So for example, the number 40 comes up in Bible all the time. What can you think that happens in 40? What are there 40 of? 40 days that Noah's in the ark. Moses is on Mount Sinai for 40 days. We wandered in the desert for 40 years. 40 basically means like a million. Like it's trying to invoke really a lot. It was really a long time. Whether it was 41 or 37 or whatever is sort of beside the point. It evokes something besides the precision of the number itself. 7 is the same way. 7 evokes something like balance, completeness, wholeness. I think probably because of its tie to the creation story. I mean, for one thing, it's a prime number, so it can't be divided by anything. I think there's a mathematical element here too. But 7 also represents the totality of creation, everything in the created universe. So when you have 8 then, and I think this is a great pre-Hanukkah drash as well, 8 is kind of like infinity. It's everything that there is plus 1. Like no matter how much you get, it's one bigger than that. 8 is, it's the lyric to a Matis Yahu song. 8 is the number of infinity. So I think it actually works really well here. If we had stopped just at 7, we would almost be selling it short a little bit. I think we would be saying we're celebrating everything in creation, but by adding an 8th psalm, we're sort of acknowledging that there's more to it than that. There's something else. The universe is more than the sum of its parts, as it were. That's my drash on the 8th psalm. I cannot tell you what they were thinking here. It's entirely possible that they just included 93 because they were so used to saying it right after 92, and it just was included because it was already a unit.
So
Please, Lisa.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to remember where these guys came from when the Kabbalists, when they came to Tzfat. They came from
Spain, yeah,
Okay.
primarily Spain, yeah. Like that's where the movement initially took root.
So during the expulsion.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's all related. That's another history class that we'll have another day. But good. So good. So up through 8, and that's 7th Psalm, and I hope you're not too anxious because I haven't addressed Lachadodi yet. That 7th Psalm is introduced by Lachadodi, which deserves, we could definitely again do a whole other class on just Lachadodi, but deserves some special mention. So it's on page 21 in your Sim Shalom. This is in some ways the greatest work of liturgical poetry. There's a whole lot going on here. For one thing, the author's name is spelled into the poem. So if you look at and it's bolded here in your Sim Shalom, if you look at the first letter of each verse, so L'chanodi likrat kala p'nei Shabbat neKabbalah is the refrain, and it comes up each time, which as you can tell, is a direct allusion to the text in the Talmud. Come, my beloved, L'chanodi, come, my beloved, likrat Shabbat, likrat kala, to welcome the bride, p'nei Shabbat neKabbalah, let's welcome the Sabbath. But the first letter of each stanza spells out Shlomo Halevi. Shin Lamed Mem Hey, Hey Lamed Vav Yud, and that was the name of the poet composer Shlomo Halevi, Solomon Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz was his name. So for one thing,
that is immortality.
I know, right? I like to think that I would be that clever. But I don't think so. I mean,
not very humble.
No, but also considering the level that every one of these, the way every one of these verses is perfectly constructed, it's pretty impressive. So good on you, Alkabetz. You deserve to take a victory lap on this one. Okay. So for one thing, he wrote his name into the song, which is genius. 2, that refrain of "Come, my beloved." Again, in the same way that the Kabbalists reframed these psalms to be about, they're addressed to Shabbat now, who's the beloved in this?
The Shabbat bride. No.
That's who we're going to greet. Read it carefully. Come, my beloved, with a welcome. Let's Nikabbalah. Let's go welcome. So it's saying it's
the us part.
Yeah. Who is coming with us to welcome Shabbat?
Presumably all Israel.
Could be. Any other ideas?
So this is only sung in the synagogue. This is not a home practice.
You don't need a minion for it. It's just a piyut, but it's part of the presumption is you'd be singing in synagogue. Yeah.
The only so not the only, but 2 other prominent people are Adonai and Messiah in this.
Okay, in terms of characters in the story, that's a good approach. Yes, God and Moshiach definitely are definitely characters. So the Torah and the prophets frequently utilized language of marriage, love, faithfulness to describe that exclusive relationship between God and Israel. God is framed as, when Israel went and worshipped other gods, the verb the Torah deploys is whoring around. We're told right after Shema, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, you should love God with all your heart. So it deploys the language of marriage, love, faithfulness. Our beloved in this poem is God. Yeah.
It's later on that I was trying to see if they're using the same you throughout.
Yeah, I think it mostly works.
Yeah, so it's this is.
Sort of talks about God in the third person a little bit too, but yeah. So a really interesting reframing here. Instead of we always are praying to God. We're always either talking to God or about God. Here we're saying God, you're with us in this. And us together, we're going to go greet Shabbat. Another like brilliant reframing of the way, like sort of standing prayer on its head in some ways.
But there's weird stuff in here too, so.
Weird stuff. What do you mean?
Well, so on 22, second
Yeah.
stanza,
Mm-hmm.
your God will then celebrate you, or the previous stanza, it's like, the one I was looking at previously was sheltered by you when.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to recommend that we table the molecular discussion of Lachadadi for another day. There is a volume of that My People's Siddur that's just devoted to Kabbalat Shabbat, and we'll have a line by line breakdown of Lachadadi for you if you're into it.
Pronouns are always used interestingly.
Yeah, and I would give our friend Shlomo credit for using them precisely. Whatever he's conveying is probably on purpose
I'm
here.
sure it's always on
Yeah.
purpose. It's just often.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, so the beloved here is God, with whom we go out into the fields to welcome Shabbat. And even though we don't actually go out into the fields anymore, there is still an element of that remaining in the kind of choreography of the service for that last verse. It's tradition for the congregation to stand and turn and face the entrance, whatever the entrance to the place that you're at is, to open the door, even if you're within range. And in that way, symbolically welcome Shabbat, where we get that line lifted straight from the Talmud, Boi kala, come my bride, or enter my bride, enter my bride. Okay. Questions about Kabbalat Shabbat, or Shabbat, Friday night in general? Yes.
I have a little question about
Sure.
number 5.
Mhm.
How does that, because I've been to Kabbalat Shabbat services here, how
Yeah.
does that tradition, how does that look? Or at least in our minhag?
We don't do it here.
Okay.
Either what appears in Kol Neshama, the reconstruction of Siddur that we use, is these 6 psalms. And actually, I keep glossing over this, so I'm taking it for granted. There are those hymns at the beginning too. We have those hymns. We have the 6 psalms. I think our book leaves that out of the koach, but I'm going to have to go back and double check now. We have the Chadadi, we have these 2 psalms, and then we have a Chatzi Kaddish here,
Mm-hmm.
making the break in between Kabbalat Shabbat and Ma'ariv, and we leave out Morning Kaddish in the study section. We just replace that with Chatzi Kaddish.
So, but if it was going to be included, say if you're using the.
How would we do it?
Yeah.
I've not actually been a part of a community that has done that, but my guess is it would be a silent reading, or perhaps a reader would select a piece to read out loud. I've not actually really seen it done. I think even though it's included here, frequently most congregations, or either they take a few moments of quiet for you to read, or just hurdle it entirely because it's. I don't know. I don't exactly know why that's fallen out of favor. I mean, other than
We added all the bulk at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't fit in terms of the emotional arc of this whole thing. This is like a journey, right? And then I'm supposed to study legal text now? That's kind of weird. So I get why it would be taken back out, but I don't really have any specific reason why that would be the case. So, okay. All right, Adkan, we are okay. We're doing okay. I'm glad I left out the Torah stuff because we got a bit to talk about on Shabbat Shacharit. Okay, so rather than rewrite all of this stuff, I'm going to direct you to the other handout I gave you today. And folks who are watching, you're going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage here because I don't think I have a printout of this accessible to you yet, but when I post this, I'll go ahead and add it to the comments. I'll make a digital version and I will send it to you right afterwards. But basically, actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna rewrite this quickly because otherwise it's going to be difficult to follow. Is it all right for folks in the room here if I erase this stuff? I think it'll help me teach it too to be able to write it down and follow. I'm just not gonna write everything. Okay. The first thing to do is to quickly rewrite the 7-part arc of a Shacharit service. We have Birkot Shachar. Those are the morning blessings. We have Psuke, Zimra. Those are the verses of Psalm that serve as our word. We have Shema and blessings. Oops. Building up to Amidah. And then Tachanun, the silent prayer, and then Torah reading, back down to concluding prayers. Okay, hopefully a familiar shape to folks who have been following along this class the whole time. Okay. Shabbat morning follows basically the same pattern. There's still the slope up, the same preliminary readings. Shema is still present, Amidah is still present, culminating in Torah reading as we would on a Monday or a Thursday, and heading into concluding prayers. This is, the assumption presumably has always been that there's more time on Shabbat. And since you're not working, there's room to expand and embellish. And so the Shabbat morning service follows the same arc. I'm going to label the Shacharit for clarity. Follows the same arc, but has been dramatically expanded and augmented in a lot of different ways. It's also been contracted in certain parts to omit prayers that are inappropriate for the occasion. We'll touch on some of those. I'm going to point out the big changes. We should know there are also numerous smaller changes all throughout. Added psalms, added readings, added piyutim, sort of added here and there. The more you know your weekday liturgy, the better you're going to catch which of those are special, but it also kind of doesn't matter because they're added additionally all throughout. Okay, so working through our arc, Birkot Shachar, and if you want to follow along in your Sim Shalom as well, you can go to page 61. If you are following on Sefaria, you want to go ahead and just keep scrolling down past Kabbalat Shabbat, or go up, navigate up a menu, and go to Shabbat. Shabbat Shacharit. Birkot Shachar, basically the same. No dramatic differences in Birkot Shachar. It's same order of the blessings, all that kind of stuff. Remember, this was imported from the home ritual, so it makes sense that would, everyone wakes up the same way, even on Shabbat. It makes sense that this would be identical. Basically, no changes in Birkot Shachar. Psuke Zimra is significantly expanded. If you want to follow along here, you don't have to, but you can. It's on page 83 in your Sim Shalom. And basically, there's additional psalms of various kinds. I'm not going to go through all the additional because it would just be throwing numbers at you that wouldn't make any sense. A significant number of additional psalms, but keeping the same, the daily Hallel we talked about, Ashrei through Psalm 150 is still in there. And the other big piece is there's an extension of the final blessing. Extended final blessing, which is called Birkat Hashir. So the Shir, in this case, is the Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, which is, at least we don't always do it as a matter of practice here, but the Song of the Sea, Exodus 20, is all in there. And there's a blessing that follows it. It's a lengthy piyut added just before Yishtamach, so I think it's probably 106-ish, somewhere in there. You're going to know it as Nishmat. Nishmat kolcha, Nishmat kolcha, Tevarech et Shemcha, Adonai Eloheinu, right? 104, yes. It's quite lengthy, and you know well enough to look at these liturgical units. Look look at the end, look for that blessing formula, right? So if you look through, starting from Nishmat, there's no blessing formula all the way until the end of each Shabbat on 106. So it's quite lengthy. It's significantly longer than what we normally do in Shabbat weekday, or I'm sorry, in weekday shacharit. This is also where the changeover happens. Usually, if somebody's leading Sukkot Zimran, they're going to hand off to someone leading shacharit. They make that switch in the middle of this unit. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what it's all about, but it's extended from what it normally is, and it's framed as the blessing after all that text. You may recall the sort of overall outline of Sukkot Zimra was started with Baruch Shamar, and then was like blessing before reading, sort of basically a blessing before reading biblical text. Bible, like pastiche Bible verses, that daily Hallel, all those Psalms 145 through 150, more pastiche Bible verses, and the blessing afterwards. That's sort of the outline. So this is just an extension and embellishment of that final blessing that appears in weekday shacharit. Other than that, more or less the same function. It's just fleshed out and embellished, and there's just more on Shabbat. Not really a lot else to say about Shabbat Sukkot. Shema and its blessings, also materially the same as during the week, with the one exception is that the first blessing, the first of the two blessings before Shema, the Yotzer, is extended. With a couple of the liturgical poems that you're probably familiar with. Eladon, that's it. Yeah, that's the main one. Yeah. Eladon, that's an extended liturgical poem that just extends that blessing. Until you get into Ahava Rabbah, which we also know that's the Birkat Torah, the second blessing before the Shema. Everything else is the same after that, just like a regular weekday. So really, actually, not that much. It's just like kind of adding some embellishments already. Nothing really dramatically different so far. Told you before, I tell you about the Amidah. What makes that special now is the time when we get to dig into the Amidah. Okay, so we're on. If you're following along, we're on page 115. The Siddur has two options: one with the imahot, one with the matriarchs, and one without. Okay. So what you find in the Amidah of Shabbat, and like I said, this starts on Friday night as well, but I just didn't delve into detail there, is as opposed to the structure of the sort of 18 blessing structure, which is really 19, where you have 3 introductory blessings, all that middle material, and then you would have 16, 17, 18, basically, which are really 17, 18, 19. So those first 3 and the last 3, and then all those blessings in the middle. On Shabbat, all this material is collapsed into one. Only one blessing there, and then you get the same initial 3 and the same closing 3. If that makes sense. So it keeps the structure. The first 3 and the last 3 are the same. The whole middle section is collapsed into one single blessing, which is called Kedushat Hayom. Kedushat Hayom, which means sanctification of the Yom, the sanctification of the day. And the reason for that is there's an idea that, and you find this in Talmud as well, there are a lot of things that are 1/60th. There's a whole list of things that are 1/60th of their larger relative. The rabbis thought in base 6. So when they say 1/60th, they kind of mean like 1/100th or one sort of the smallest possible part of something. We mentioned in Birkat Shachar, sleep is 1/60th of death. Right, that's one example. Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. Yeah, and so if that's the case, and it's supposed to be a little taste of what a perfected world would be like, it feels weird to be petitioning and asking for things on Shabbat. So as a general rule, we leave out petitionary prayer on Shabbat. And the first big example of that is those middle blessings on Shabbat. Now, the truth is, some of this material in here is kind of petitionary as well, so the rule doesn't totally hold, but that's what we're saying. That's what we're saying. We leave out petitionary prayer, and so it's all collapsed in this one blessing, Kedushat Hayom, for which the theme is the sanctity of Shabbat, the sanctity of the Sabbath day. It's essentially kind of a mini essay on the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And it's actually, there are differences in between the different Amidot of Shabbat. The Friday night one is a little bit different from the Saturday morning one. It's a little different from the Saturday afternoon one. It's a little different from the Musaf one, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But they all maintain this 7-part structure as opposed to the 19-part structure. Does that make sense? Okay. You with me so far? Okay.
Was it
We're-
also to get the number to 7 for
Yeah.
Shabbat?
I mean, you gotta think so.
Yeah.
You gotta think so. It's a little bit too on the nose to be totally a coincidence. But yeah, the editors aren't here to ask them, so what we can do is, since there is no petitionary prayer, Tachanun doesn't make any sense. That is entirely petition. So Tachanun is omitted. Also, if the vibe really doesn't match Shabbat at all, it's all about humbling myself and how I've soaked my couch with tears. I'm so distraught. It really does not fit with the mood of Shabbat. So Tachanun is omitted on Shabbat as well as on other holidays. Torah reading, like I said, we're going to cover next week because we got plenty to do. That's its own thing. Slight differences between Shabbat Torah reading and the rest of the week. We'll get there too. Here's where we add something new entirely that's outside the bounds of what's normally present. After Torah, before concluding prayers, we add what they call Musaf. So Musaf, you recall, all along we've talked about Amidah as corresponding both to, it has this sort of patriarchal basis. Abraham invented Shacharit, and Isaac invented Mincha, and Jacob invented Mariv. It has that, but also has a parallel to the sacrificial system. And what happened was in the temple on Shabbat, there was an extra sacrifice. Musaf means extra, supplemental, something like that. It was the extra. It was a holiday, sort of semi-holiday. So we did a little extra. There was an extra sacrifice, and so we do an extra Amidah basically. Its contents are another Amidah. Can be done with a repetition and would be normally done that way. We frequently, for the sake of time, do what they call a Heichei Kedusha, where we start together through the Kedusha and then finish silently. That saves a little bit of time, but normally would be done with a repetition out loud. It includes that unique, it has the same 7-part structure, the 1, 2, 3, the big 4, and then 5, 6, 7. That same structure. This third blessing in the Musaf Amidah is unique. If you've done it before, it's frequently embellished with extra melody. It's that there's a lot of congregational melodies, a lot of singing together in this section. It's not necessarily present in the third blessing here. This is they call this Kedushat Hashem, the sanctification of the name, in other words, sanctification of God in the third blessing. It has that same unique middle blessing, like I said, different from Kedushat Hayom here and the other ones, but still on that theme of sanctifying the day. This one here in Musaf specifically recalls the temple service. The Sim Shalom actually offers an alternative, one that doesn't quite hit the sacrifice notes so much on the nose. This is one of the things that morphs in the old bracha here. It evokes the sacrifices that were offered specifically on the first of the month, and also, so that's a special case too. Questions about Musaf? I mean, what it looks like is, sort of from a practical standpoint, we're going up, we're going up, we're going up, we're going up. Torah, back down to Amidah, and kind of weird. Like, it definitely doesn't feel like another level up from there. It kind of feels like, oh man, I'm ready to eat. Here we are doing another Amidah. But it's an integral part of the Shabbat liturgy because of that memorializing of the temple. And then in the concluding prayers, all your greatest hits are still there. Aleinu, Mourner's Kaddish. There are a couple of pieces that are added. Primarily two piyutim primarily, which are pretty well known. Ein Keloheinu. And Shir HaKavod. Ein Keloheinu, extremely well known. I think even in Reform circles, we definitely knew it here. Made an appearance notably in the movie Keeping the Faith. You ever seen that one? The Harlem Gospel Choir sings Ein Keloheinu. It's awesome. Shir HaKavod, we don't do it. It's another quite lengthy piyut. I was part of a dominant community that did, but their whole deal was conservative shul, but their whole deal was doing everything. They'd start Birkot HaShachar at like 7:45 in the morning and be done at like 1:30. For reference, here we start at 9:30.
Up at 7:45?
Absolutely not. We were way short of a minyan. I was the rabbinic intern, so I was there it was me and like 3 other people in this giant sanctuary too, and everyone had their spot. So there was like a guy over there, and a guy over there, and a guy over there, and then me right in the middle. It was right. That's
people show up just in time for the Torah service then?
actually, it was packed by the Torah service. Like, it was actually great. But for reference here, Beidan, we started about 9:30. Fully an hour and 3/4 later, because they did everything. But they would get here and then sing Shir HaKavod, and it's actually really cool. It's got some tricky Hebrew, but at that point, frequently we're ready to be done. Again, sort of just reflecting the embellishment and the added expansiveness of Shabbat liturgy over and above the regular weekday. I think it also lists here a list of Levitical Psalms, lessons on study and peace. Like there's some other bits, and basically every congregation makes their own decisions about what to do and what not to do. We're kind of showing you the menu so that you'll know what's going on. Yeah.
So if we did Shabbat morning service in the Kol HaNeshama Siddur,
which we do on like
whole arc? Yeah, we do.
Like on a bar mitzvah, yeah. The ark is intact. I mean, basically, no matter which denomination of Judaism you're in.
You always do it yourself.
No, I would say no. But I would say the overall arc, the sort of shape of the service is the same. There's always a warm up.
Right.
And Shema and Amidah buildings, like that's never really going to change, no matter which denomination. No. I think there may be a Musaf in that book. I'd have to double check. Thus far, we haven't done it.
Oh, that's what I thought.
Partially because it's a bar. We usually use that book on a Saturday morning when it's a bar mitzvah, and we sort of let that family dictate according to their custom, and frequently that's not their custom. We haven't done that yet, but we could very well. Otherwise, even in like a reform setting, the reform movement did away with basically anything that seemed redundant to them. They did away with every Amidah repetition. Why would you say it twice? They did away with Musaf because we already said Amidah once. That was part of their idea of sort of modernizing and bringing what they saw as kind of archaic prayer into line with modern Protestant norms. There's a bit of reaction against that now the other way, because I think there was something really lost in that process. But yeah, Reform Siddur will not have Musaf. Definitely won't have like Shir HaKavod and things like that. As we sort of touched on, this is a lot. Mm-hmm. And like the Siddur is, if one was to be cynical about it, kind of bloated with material at this point. Like it's, for a congregation who really wants to do everything there, like the congregation I was part of, it's, you're there for like 6 hours. That's a lot.
But it also seems like that happens when everybody has a new idea. This is really important. We should put this in. And then eventually it's.
I would say that is you hit on the nose like the operative principle of how all this came together. Somebody had a really good idea, and it caught on in one way or another. It was cool enough to want to do again, and sure enough, soon enough, it was tradition, and everyone was convinced that it was taught to Moses at Sinai, and it's been around forever. And how could you not do Shir HaKavod? How could you not do even Kabbalat Shabbat? Like that was added at some point, and late too, 16th century. That's thousands of years after the solidification of the prayer book. For the most part. So, yeah, that's been the story. It's been the story, and it's really, I think, at this point, crowded out some what otherwise could be new innovation and kind of renovation of some of these things.
And it also makes the structure harder to see.
Yes, which is why classes like this are really good.
Useful.
I would absolutely agree. I think that was a big advancement for me, is to be able to look at these in terms of units, because, it's really easy to miss the forest for the trees. I think I used that right. Yeah. To not really get the picture because you're stuck looking at the little units. Absolutely. I think that's totally true. So it's a little cynical because a lot of this is really beautiful. Like it's really awesome and creative work, and there's just sometimes too much of it. So good. So that brings us to the end of Shabbat. We've covered all the weekday services and at least 2 out of 3 Shabbat services. We definitely need to cover Torah in our last section next week. And I do want to touch a little bit on holidays. You will find that every holiday is different. Although there is, kind of generally a holiday way of doing things, which is a lot like Shabbat, but with a few differences. So we'll go over that a little bit. And definitely want to touch on Hallel, which is, like I said, its own. So it's sort of like Musaf. It's something kind of off this path completely. But I think that actually fits a lot better in the arc, especially for holidays. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And any overriding questions, things that have been sticking with you over the course of the class. I think it's also a great time to sort of look back over how have our perspectives on prayer changed? What sort of makes more sense now? How can we kind of use this? So if you're able to do some thinking of that, think about that over the course of the week. I want to maybe write some notes. You could write me a note ahead of time. I can incorporate that, or just bring your great questions and observations. We'll do a little kind of debrief discussion at the end and get some feedback. Sound good? All right. Thanks everyone for watching online. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.